The sun was setting behind the towering trees as I made my way down the gravel path leading to Grimwood Carnival. The air was thick with the smell of fried food and popcorn, mingled with the distant sounds of carnival rides and laughter. Despite the cheerful facade, there was something off about the place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I was desperate for work, which is how I ended up here. Raven Creek was a small town, and jobs were scarce. When I saw the "Help Wanted" sign outside the carnival entrance, I didn't hesitate. I didn't care that it looked like something straight out of a horror movie. I just needed the money. The Funhouse, known as the Hall of Laughter, was the first thing that caught my eye. Its garish paint was faded, the once bright colors now dull and chipped. A giant clown face was painted above the entrance, its grin far too wide, its eyes staring down at me with an almost predatory gleam. "Hey, you must be David," a gruff voice called out. I turned to see a man in his late 40s, his face weathered and tired. He wore a red carnival vest and a name tag that read Max. "That's me," I said, trying to muster some enthusiasm. Max gave me a once-over, then handed me a crumpled piece of paper. "These are the rules. Follow them to the letter, or you won't last long here." I took the paper, confused. Rules? For working in a funhouse? Max's eyes narrowed. "Trust me. The rules aren't just for show. You break them, and, well, you'll see." I glanced down at the list, my confusion deepening as I read. Every night at closing, count the clowns. There should always be 6. If you see a clown with a black tear painted on its face, do not look it in the eyes. Do not enter the Hall of Mirrors after 11:30 p.m. If you hear a child laughing behind you, do not turn around. Before locking up, make sure the red door at the back of the funhouse is closed. If it's open, leave immediately. If you find a toy clown on the floor, do not pick it up. Never, under any circumstances, be inside the funhouse when the clock strikes midnight. I laughed nervously, expecting Max to crack a smile, but his face remained stone cold. "Break the rules, David," he said, "and you'll wish you hadn't." The air inside the funhouse was stale, a mixture of dust, mold, and something sweet, like old candy left to rot. The scent was cloying, sticking to the back of my throat as I walked down the narrow hallway illuminated by flickering, colored lights. The walls were covered with old, peeling posters of clowns with wide, toothy grins, their eyes following me wherever I moved. The laughter of children echoed faintly through the building, though I was sure there was no one else here at this hour. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched, and it wasn't just the creepy posters. I had just started my shift, but already, I was regretting taking this job. But the money was good, and after months of unemployment, I couldn't afford to be picky. Max had left me to handle things on my own after showing me the basics, turning the lights on, managing the entrance, and ensuring the rules were strictly followed. The funhouse was eerily quiet now that the last of the carnival goers had gone home. The only sound was the distant hum of the generator powering the rides outside. I glanced down at the list of rules again, the paper crumpled in my sweaty hands. Every night at closing, count the clowns. There should always be 6. I took a deep breath. How hard could it be to count a few creepy clowns? I walked deeper into the funhouse, passing a series of distorted mirrors that made my reflection warp and stretch into grotesque shapes. The shadows around me seemed to twist and writhe, like something was lurking just out of sight. Just get through the night, I told myself. Then you can decide if the pay is worth it. I reached the central chamber, where 6 life-sized clown mannequins stood in a circle beneath a single, flickering bulb. Their faces were painted with bright, exaggerated smiles, their eyes wide and unblinking. Each clown was dressed in a different, garish outfit. One had a red polka-dot suit, another wore a top hat, and yet another had a ruffled collar that reminded me of an old circus performer. I counted them, my voice barely more than a whisper. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Everything seemed fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The clowns were motionless, their eyes staring into nothingness. But there was something off about their positions. I was sure the clown with the ruffled collar had been facing the wall when I first walked in, but now it was turned slightly, as if it had moved on its own. I laughed nervously. "You're imagining things, David," I muttered to myself. But as I turned to leave, I could have sworn I heard a faint rustling sound behind me, like fabric shifting. I spun around, but the clowns were still, their painted grins frozen in place. My heart was racing, and my mind flashed back to rule number 1, count the clowns. There should always be 6. I quickly recounted them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Relief washed over me, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I was halfway down the corridor toward the exit when I heard it, a faint, high-pitched giggle echoing behind me. The sound sent chills racing down my spine. Rule number 4, if you hear a child laughing behind you, do not turn around. My heart skipped a beat. The laughter grew louder, closer, as if a child was running up behind me, playing some twisted game of hide-and-seek. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to see who, or what, was there. But I forced myself to keep walking, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The laughter turned into a shriek, high-pitched and full of malice, and I broke into a run. My footsteps echoed through the funhouse as I sprinted toward the exit. The air around me grew colder, the scent of decay and candy becoming almost overpowering. But I didn't dare look back. The moment I burst through the door and into the open air of the carnival grounds, the laughter stopped. The night was still, the carnival ride silent and motionless in the darkness. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Pull yourself together," I whispered. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you." But deep down, I knew that something was terribly wrong with this place. I glanced at my watch. It was almost 11:30 p.m., time to close up for the night. I made my way back to the funhouse to turn off the lights and lock the doors. The colorful bulbs flickered ominously as I walked through the twisted hallways, my footsteps echoing in the darkness. I was just about to leave when I noticed one of the clowns in the central chamber had shifted positions again. This time, it was the one in the red polka dot suit. Its head was tilted, and a single black tear was painted beneath its left eye. Rule number 2, if you see a clown with a black tear painted on its face, do not look it in the eyes. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. The clown's eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light, its painted smile stretched into a grotesque grin. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor, remembering the rule. I tried to turn away, but it was as if the air had thickened around me, making it difficult to move. I could feel the clown's gaze boring into the side of my head, a malevolent presence that seemed to want to drag me into whatever hellish dimension it came from. The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of red and white as the clown's head turned toward me. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "Just get out. Don't look. Don't break the rule." With a burst of willpower, I forced myself to walk away. The clown's laughter echoed faintly behind me, but I kept my eyes down, refusing to turn around until I was safely outside. The final task for the night was to check the red door at the back of the funhouse. Max had been adamant about this one, rule number 5, before locking up, make sure the red door at the back of the funhouse is closed. If it's open, leave immediately. The door was hidden behind a stack of old crates and forgotten carnival props, its crimson paint faded and peeling. I had nearly forgotten about it in my rush to leave. The hallway leading to it was dark, the air thick with the scent of dust and mildew. As I approached, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the crack. My heart sank. The rule had been clear, if the door was open, I was supposed to leave immediately. But something in me refused to run. I reached out and gently pushed the door closed, my hand trembling. The air around me seemed to grow even colder, and I could hear the faint sound of whispers coming from the other side. "Not tonight," I whispered to myself, turning the key in the lock. The whispers stopped, and the door sealed shut with a final, resounding click. I turned away, eager to get out of this cursed place. As I walked back toward the entrance, the lights flickered one last time, and I heard a voice whisper in my ear. "See you tomorrow, David." By the time I got home, it was almost 2 a.m. My hands were still shaking, and every shadow in my apartment seemed to hide something sinister. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head, that the funhouse was just a creepy old building and nothing more. But deep down, I knew better. The clowns, the laughter, the black tear, they were real. And the rules were the only thing keeping me alive. I had made it through the first night, but I knew that the carnival was just getting started. And if I wanted to survive, I had to follow the rules. No matter what. The next evening, I arrived at Grimwood Carnival feeling a pit of dread in my stomach. The events of the previous night played on a loop in my mind, the laughter, the whispering clowns, the sinister black tear. Every part of me screamed to quit this job, to never set foot inside that funhouse again. But with rent overdue and my bank account nearly empty, I didn't have much of a choice. The carnival was in full swing tonight, the air thick with the smell of fried food, cotton candy, and sweat. I could hear the distant roar of the roller coaster and the delighted screams of children as they ran from one attraction to the next. But none of it made the suffocating anxiety in my chest any lighter. As I approached the funhouse, I saw Max leaning against the entrance, smoking a cigarette. His eyes were sunken, and his usually stern expression seemed even more grim than usual. "Ready for round 2?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Not really," I admitted. "But I don't have much of a choice." He nodded, taking a long drag from his cigarette. "Just follow the rules, David. And remember, whatever you do, don't break them." I gave him a weak nod and headed inside, the door creaking shut behind me with a sound that felt uncomfortably final. The air inside was just as thick and stale as before, that sickly sweet scent of decaying candy lingering in the dimly lit corridors. I kept my eyes on the floor, unwilling to look at my warped reflection in the distorted mirrors lining the walls. Every step I took felt like walking into the mouth of a beast waiting to swallow me whole. I reached the central chamber, where the 6 life-sized clowns stood in their eternal, grinning poses. My stomach clenched as I began counting them, just like last night. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I froze. There were only 5 clowns. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and counted again. Still, only 5. Panic clawed at my throat as I tried to remember if I had miscounted the night before. Rule number 1, there should always be 6 clowns. The 6th clown, the one in the polka dot suit, was missing. I turned on my flashlight, scanning the room frantically. "This can't be happening," I muttered to myself, my voice shaking. The sound of faint, mechanical whirring came from somewhere behind me, and my skin prickled. I spun around, and there it was, the missing clown, standing at the entrance to the hallway I had just come through. Its painted grin was wider now, its eyes gleaming in the flickering light. It was closer. I took a shaky step back, my mind racing. I hadn't broken any rules. At least, I didn't think I had. But the clown was here, and it was staring right at me. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself. "Just follow the rules." I counted again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The missing clown was back in its spot, as if it had never moved. But I knew what I had seen. The funhouse was playing games with me. Trying to keep my nerves in check, I continued my shift, constantly looking over my shoulder. The clowns seemed to shift positions whenever I wasn't looking, their grins widening, their eyes tracking my movements. As the night wore on, the laughter of carnival goers outside grew fainter. The once lively music from the rides faded into a distant hum, leaving only the eerie silence of the funhouse. I made my rounds, checking the various rooms and corridors to make sure nothing was out of place. But then, just as I was passing the Hall of Mirrors, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. This time, it was louder, more distinct, and it seemed to come from directly behind me. My entire body went rigid. Rule number 4, if you hear a child laughing behind you, do not turn around." The laughter grew louder, echoing off the mirrors, and I felt a cold gust of air brush against the back of my neck, as if someone, or something, was standing right behind me. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, but I forced myself to keep walking, my heart hammering in my chest. The laughter turned into a series of soft whispers, words I couldn't quite make out. I bit down hard on my lip to keep myself from turning, focusing on the flickering lights ahead. Finally, the laughter stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I risked to glance at one of the mirrors, but all I saw was my own pale, frightened face staring back at me. I managed to finish my rounds, my nerves frayed but intact. I was just about to start closing up when I noticed something in the corner of the central chamber. The clown with the black tear was gone. I could feel my pulse quicken. I knew I hadn't broken rule number 2. I hadn't looked into its eyes, not directly, anyway. But the Funhouse seemed to have a way of bending reality, of making you question what you thought you knew. As I frantically searched for the missing clown, I turned a corner and came face to face with it. It was standing in a narrow corridor, its face inches away from mine. Its black tear seemed to glisten in the dim light, and its eyes were no longer painted glass. They were real, blinking, and filled with rage. I couldn't stop myself. Our eyes locked, and the air around me seemed to freeze. The world tilted, and suddenly I was falling, the walls of the funhouse stretching and warping around me. The clown's grin grew impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, yellow teeth. "You broke the rules, David," it hissed, its voice a chorus of children's whispers. "Now you must pay." The floor beneath me vanished, and I fell into darkness. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I gasped, trying to get my bearings, but everything was dark. The air here was colder, thicker, and the smell of rot was almost unbearable. Dim lights flickered to life, revealing a hidden chamber beneath the funhouse. The walls were covered in old, yellowed photographs of children, some smiling, others looking terrified. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized these were not just decorations. These were real children, and they were somehow tied to the curse of the carnival. As I stumbled to my feet, I noticed something else, a small, dusty book lying on an old wooden table in the center of the room. I picked it up with trembling hands and flipped through its pages. It was a journal, filled with scribbled notes and frantic drawings. The entries were dated from the 1930s, and each page was filled with references to the clowns, the carnival, and strange rituals meant to bind the souls of the lost. The final entry sent chills down my spine. The clowns demand more. The rules keep them at bay, but only for so long. If the sacrifices stop, they will take what they want. They are always watching, waiting for someone to break the rules. I slammed the book shut, my mind racing. I had to get out of here. Whatever these clowns were, they weren't just animatronics or mannequins. They were something else, something far darker. As I turned to leave, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, soft, shuffling, like someone dragging their feet. I turned around, flashlight trembling in my hand, and saw them, the 6 clowns, their eyes glowing with a cold, hungry light. They were no longer mannequins. They were moving, their twisted bodies contorting as they advanced toward me, their painted smiles widening with each step. "Play with us, David," they chanted, their voices overlapping in a twisted symphony. "Stay with us, forever." I bolted for the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. The clowns were faster than they looked, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets controlled by invisible strings. I reached the ladder that led back up to the funhouse floor, scrambling up as fast as I could. But just as I reached the top, a cold hand grabbed my ankle, yanking me back down. "Rule breaker," one of the clowns hissed, its grip like ice. "You can never leave." With a final burst of strength, I kicked free and hauled myself up, slamming the trapdoor shut behind me. The laughter of the clowns echoed from below, a haunting reminder that they would always be waiting. I burst through the trapdoor into the main floor of the funhouse, gasping for breath, the laughter of the clowns still echoing in my ears. My heart was racing, my entire body shaking with adrenaline. The hidden chamber, the moving clowns, the cursed photographs, it was all too much. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to collect myself. The funhouse was deathly silent now, the dim lights casting long, sinister shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. I needed answers. I had to figure out what the hell was happening in this place before it drove me insane. Max's warning echoed in my mind, follow the rules, David. And remember, whatever you do, don't break them. But how could I follow the rules when they were shifting beneath my feet? The clowns seemed to have their own agenda, and whatever it was, it involved me. I couldn't keep blindly following rules that made no sense. I needed to understand what I was up against. And there was only one person who might have the answers I needed, Elena. I locked the funhouse doors behind me and sprinted across the carnival grounds toward the employee trailers. The air outside was frigid, and the sounds of the carnival were a distant murmur as I hurried past empty stalls and flickering lights. Most of the carnival workers were packing up for the night, their faces grim and exhausted. I found Elena sitting on the steps of her trailer, smoking a cigarette, her eyes distant and haunted. She looked up as I approached, her expression hardening. "What the hell happened to you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't even force a laugh. "It's the funhouse," I said, my voice shaking. "There's something wrong with that place. The clowns, the rules, they're not just some carnival gimmick, are they?" Her eyes widened for a moment, but she quickly masked her expression. "You should leave while you can, David. The funhouse isn't something you can understand. It's been here longer than any of us. Please, Elena," I pleaded. "I need to know. I broke one of the rules, and now I think they're coming for me." She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Meet me behind the Ferris wheel in 10 minutes, she whispered. "I'll tell you what I know. But if anyone finds out I talked to you, we're both dead." 10 minutes felt like an eternity. I waited behind the Ferris wheel, my heart pounding, half expecting one of the clowns to appear out of the darkness and drag me back into the funhouse. But finally, Elena arrived, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly. "I've worked here for a year," she began, her voice low. "When I first started, I thought it was just a job. But it didn't take long for me to realize that this carnival is different." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning in closer. She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself. The funhouse wasn't always like this. According to some of the older workers, it used to be just a regular attraction, filled with cheap thrills and plastic clowns. But then Mr. Grimwood took over. My stomach clenched at the mention of the carnival's enigmatic owner. What did he do? Elena's eyes darted around nervously before she continued. He brought in those clowns. They weren't part of the original funhouse. And he started enforcing those bizarre rules. At first, people thought it was just some weird attempt to create a creepy atmosphere, but then things started happening. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. People started disappearing, David. Workers, visitors, even kids. Anyone who broke the rules. Elena pulled out a crumpled newspaper clipping from her pocket and handed it to me. The headline read, "Local Man Missing After Visit to Grimwood Carnival." The article was dated over 20 years ago. But it wasn't the only one. The more I read, the more I realized that disappearances had been happening every year the carnival came to town. Mr. Grimwood made a pact with something, Elena said, her voice trembling. Something that needs to be fed. The funhouse is cursed, David. The clowns aren't just lifeless dolls. They're vessels. Vessels for what? I asked, a chill running down my spine. The souls of the people who break the rules, she said, her eyes hollow. The clowns were once real people, just like us. They were workers who broke the rules, and now, they're trapped. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The clowns weren't just mannequins or animatronics, they were tortured souls, bound to the funhouse by some dark, ancient magic. And now that I had broken one of the rules, they were coming for me. I couldn't just leave it at that. If what Elena said was true, then I needed to find proof, something that would help me understand how to break the curse. I thanked her and hurried back to the funhouse, even though every part of me screamed to get as far away as possible. The carnival was empty now, the ride silent and the lights dimming as the generators wound down for the night. The funhouse loomed in the darkness like a sleeping beast, waiting for me to step back into its maw. I unlocked the door with trembling hands and stepped inside. The air was cold, the silence suffocating. I had a new mission now. I needed to find the source of the curse, something that could end this nightmare once and for all. I made my way to the hidden chamber beneath the funhouse, where I had discovered the old photographs. This time, I was prepared. I brought a flashlight and a crowbar, determined to uncover whatever secrets the funhouse was hiding. The trapdoor groaned as I forced it open and climbed down the rickety ladder. The photographs were still there, staring at me with their lifeless eyes. But this time, I noticed something I had missed before, a large, leather-bound book hidden beneath the pile of old papers. The book was Mr. Grimwood's journal. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking as I read the ramblings of a madman. The early entries detailed Mr. Grimwood's obsession with making his carnival the most famous in the country. But as the entries progressed, they became darker, more unhinged. The carnival was dying, one entry read. I needed something to draw in the crowds, something that would make Grimwood Carnival legendary. That's when he wrote about a stranger who had visited him one night, a man dressed in black, with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. The stranger had offered him a deal, eternal success for the carnival, in exchange for something else. Grimwood had agreed. The stranger instructed him to create the rules, to enforce them without mercy. And in return, the carnival would never die. But the cost was steep. The clowns need to be fed, Grimwood had scrawled in frantic handwriting. They hunger for souls. They must be contained with the rules. Break even one, and they will take what they are owed. A loud creak echoed through the chamber, pulling me from the horrifying journal. The red door at the far end of the room was slowly swinging open on its own. A cold, foul-smelling wind gusted through the room, and I could hear faint whispers coming from the darkness beyond. Rule number 5. If the red door at the back of the funhouse is open, leave immediately. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my curiosity, my need for answers, overpowered my fear. I grabbed the flashlight, pointed it at the door, and took a hesitant step forward. The whispers grew louder, turning into the sound of children's laughter. I stepped through the doorway and found myself in a long, narrow corridor lined with mirrors. But these mirrors weren't like the ones in the funhouse. They were twisted, warped, reflecting not just my image but dark, shadowy figures standing behind me. The laughter grew louder, more maniacal, as I moved deeper into the corridor. And that's when I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the hallway, a clown with a black tear painted on its face. I tried to turn back, but the door slammed shut behind me. The clowns were no longer bound by the rules. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash, plunging me into near darkness. My flashlight flickered, casting weak, jittery beams that did little to penetrate the shadows. The air was frigid, and the whispers that had lured me into this nightmare grew louder, morphing into mocking laughter that echoed down the narrow corridor. The hall stretched out before me, lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors that warped my reflection into grotesque shapes. Each mirror showed twisted versions of me, one with hollow eyes, another with a wide, unnatural grin, and yet another where my skin seemed to be peeling away, revealing something dark and monstrous beneath. My heart was pounding in my chest. I was deep within the funhouse now, far beyond where the carnival goers were ever allowed to venture. This was the funhouse's heart, a place where reality bent and broke under the weight of whatever malevolent force controlled it. I turned to leave, but the door was gone. It had simply vanished, leaving only an endless hallway of twisted reflections. Panic surged through me. I had been tricked, lured into breaking yet another rule. Rule number 3, do not enter the Hall of Mirrors after 11:30 p.m. I glanced at my watch. It was 11:45. As I tried to regain my bearings, my flashlight flickered and went out. I smacked it against my palm, desperate to bring back the light, but it was no use. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating blackness that swallowed me whole. I could hear the mirrors creaking and shifting around me, as if they were alive, closing in. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a figure darting between the reflections. My pulse quickened. I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, my mind playing games with me, but the truth was far more horrifying. A pair of glowing eyes blinked at me from one of the mirrors. I turned to face it, my breath catching in my throat. It was the clown with the black tear, its painted face twisted into a mockery of a smile. Its eyes were no longer glass. They were real, gleaming with malevolence. "You broke the rules, David," it whispered, its voice a distorted echo. "Now we can play." I took a step back, my hands trembling. The clown's reflection stayed in place, but the real nightmare began when it slowly stepped out of the mirror. The air around me grew colder, the smell of decay intensifying. The clown moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, its limbs bending at impossible angles. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like the floor had turned into quicksand, trapping me in place. The clown's grin widened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "You can't leave now," it hissed, its voice layered with the laughter of children. "You belong to us." Panic surged through me, my mind racing for a way out. The clowns were no longer confined to their static forms, they had become something far worse, twisted, living manifestations of the Funhouse's curse. I turned to the mirrors, hoping to find some clue, some hidden exit. But each reflection showed a different nightmare. In one, the clowns were dragging me into the darkness, their skeletal hands tearing into my flesh. In another, I was a clown myself, my face painted in a grotesque smile, my eyes hollow and lifeless. "No, no, no!" I screamed, grabbing a loose piece of wood from the floor and smashing it into one of the mirrors. Glass shattered, raining down in jagged shards, but there was no way through, only darkness beyond. The whispers in the air grew louder, almost deafening, as if the funhouse itself was mocking me. My flashlight sputtered back to life for a moment, illuminating the corridor. And that's when I saw it. A door. But it wasn't just any door, it was the red door from the hidden chamber. Rule number 5. If the red door at the back of the funhouse is open, leave immediately. But there was nowhere else to go. I was trapped in the hall of mirrors with clowns that had crossed into my reality. The rule seemed to shift like quicksand, but I had no choice. I sprinted toward the door. The whispers intensified as I reached for the door handle, a cacophony of voices warning me, taunting me. My fingers closed around the cold metal, and for a moment, I hesitated. Every rule I'd broken had brought me closer to whatever nightmare lay at the heart of Grimwood Carnival. But I was out of options. I threw the door open and stumbled through, bracing myself for whatever horrors awaited on the other side. The world shifted around me, the air thick with a foul stench. I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were covered in faded circus posters, their edges curling with age. In the center of the room was a single wooden table, and on it lay something that made my blood run cold. It was a notebook, the same one I had found in the hidden chamber, but this time, the pages were filled with new writing in a script that seemed to bleed through the paper. "The clowns are hungry. The rules keep them at bay, but only if followed to the letter. You have broken the pact. You will take my place." I slammed the notebook shut, my mind spinning. The red door hadn't led me to freedom, it had taken me deeper into the nightmare. The funhouse wasn't just cursed. It was a trap, a prison designed to bind whoever dared break its rules. The air grew colder, and I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me. The laughter that had tormented me earlier returned, louder, more insistent. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat, to see a figure stepping out of the shadows. It was Mr. Grimwood. "Welcome, David," Grimwood said, his voice smooth and oily. I see you've met my friends." He gestured toward the shadows, where the clowns loomed, their eyes glowing in the darkness. What do you want from me?" I stammered, backing away. Grimwood's smile widened, revealing teeth that were far too sharp. "You've broken the rules, David. The Funhouse demands a sacrifice, and I'm afraid you've made yourself the perfect candidate." "Why me?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "I just wanted a job." Grimwood's eyes glinted with a sick amusement. "The carnival has survived for decades because of people like you. Those who are desperate, those who don't ask questions." He leaned in closer, his breath hot and foul. "The clowns need souls to keep them bound, to keep them fed. And you've broken enough rules to make a perfect offering." I tried to run, but the clowns closed in, their grinning faces stretching into grotesque masks of hunger. I was surrounded, their skeletal hands reaching for me. "You can't escape, David," Grimwood whispered. "The Funhouse will have its due." In my panic, I remembered the journal entry. The only way to break the curse is to survive until dawn without breaking any more rules. My watch read 11:55 p.m. I had 5 minutes. If I could hold out until midnight, maybe, just maybe, I could break free of this nightmare. But the clowns were relentless, their laughter growing louder, their hands clawing at me. I fought them off, smashing one in the face with the flashlight, its porcelain mask shattering like glass. But more kept coming, their eyes glowing with hunger. I sprinted through the twisted corridors, the funhouse warping around me, the walls closing in like the maw of some ancient beast. The laughter echoed in my ears, the whispers promising eternal torment. The red door appeared in front of me again, flickering like a mirage. I threw myself toward it, praying it would lead me back to reality. The moment I crossed the threshold, I was back in the main hall of the funhouse. The clock on the wall struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent corridors. The clowns froze, their hands inches from my face, their eyes going dark. The oppressive weight that had suffocated me lifted, and the whispers faded into nothingness. I stumbled to the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The lock clicked open, and I burst out into the cold night air. The carnival grounds were empty, the ride still, the lights dim. I had made it. I had survived the final night. But as I turned back to look at the funhouse, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, a new employee, wide-eyed and terrified, holding the same list of rules I had been given. The cycle was beginning again. The chill of the night air hit me like a slap in the face as I stumbled out of the funhouse, the heavy door swinging shut behind me. The once vibrant carnival grounds were now eerily silent, the flickering lights casting long, distorted shadows across the empty rides. My breath came in ragged gasps, the taste of blood and fear lingering on my tongue. I had made it out, but I wasn't safe. Not yet. The memory of the clowns, their glowing eyes and mocking laughter, was burned into my mind. The funhouse had let me go, but only because it wasn't finished with me. It felt like a cruel game, a cat toying with its prey before going in for the kill. My mind was spinning with the revelations I had discovered. The funhouse was alive, feeding on the souls of those who broke its rules. And Grimwood, he was its puppet master, ensuring the funhouse always had fresh victims. But how long had this been going on? And more importantly, was there a way to stop it? I had one last chance to find out. I needed to confront Grimwood, to force him to explain the twisted pact he had made. If there was any way to break the curse, I had to find it now, before the funhouse claimed me forever. I made my way through the dark carnival grounds, the sounds of laughter and music from earlier in the night now replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. My hands were shaking, my nerves frayed. Every shadow seemed to hide one of the clowns, waiting to pounce. The old wooden caravan that served as Mr. Grimwood's office was at the far end of the carnival grounds, hidden away behind a cluster of tents. It was dark, the only light coming from a flickering lantern hanging outside. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear the faint sound of someone talking inside. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to turn back. But I had come too far to stop now. I needed answers, and Grimwood was the only one who had them. I pushed the door open, the rusty hinges creaking loudly. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of tobacco and something far less pleasant, like rotten meat. The small room was cluttered with old papers, strange trinkets, and dusty bottles filled with liquids that glowed faintly in the dim light. Mr. Grimwood was sitting at his desk, his back to me, muttering to himself as he scribbled furiously in a tattered notebook. His voice was low and frantic, like he was trying to complete some urgent task. "Grimwood," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He froze, his pen stopping mid-stroke. Slowly, he turned to face me, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. For a moment, I saw something in those eyes, something dark, ancient, and hungry. "You survived," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and annoyance. I didn't expect that. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "What the hell is going on? What did you do to that funhouse?" Grimwood leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile curling his lips. "You really want to know, don't you? Curiosity, it's always the downfall of men like you." He gestured to a dusty bottle on his desk, filled with a dark, swirling liquid. "This carnival was on the verge of collapse," he said, his voice cold and detached. "We were losing money, the crowds were thinning. I was desperate. And that's when you made a deal," I said, my voice shaking. "A pact to keep the carnival alive, no matter the cost." Grimwood's grin widened. "A man came to me one night. He offered me a solution, eternal success, crowds that would never stop coming, in exchange for a few sacrifices." He waved his hand dismissively, as if the lives of those who had disappeared over the years were nothing more than an inconvenience. "The funhouse was the key," he continued, his eyes gleaming. "A place where reality bends, where the rules can trap souls. As long as the rules are enforced, the clowns stay bound. But break even one rule, and the funhouse takes what it's owed." My mind was racing. But why me? Why now? Grimwood's smile faded, his expression growing darker. "The funhouse has grown restless. The clowns are hungry, and the old rituals aren't working like they used to. The carnival needs a new caretaker, someone to enforce the rules, to keep the clowns fed." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "You've already broken the rules, David. The funhouse has marked you. Your soul is forfeit unless..." "Unless what?" I demanded, my heart pounding. "Unless you take my place," Grimwood said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The funhouse needs a keeper, someone to enforce the rules. Take the job, and you'll be spared. Refuse, and you'll join the clowns." My mind was spinning. Take his place? Become the new caretaker of the cursed funhouse? It was madness. But the alternative, being turned into one of those twisted clowns, trapped in that nightmare forever, was worse. "Why me?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Why not find someone else?" Grimwood's eyes glinted with a cold amusement. "Because you broke the rules, David. You've already been claimed. You can either take the job willingly or be forced into it. Either way, the funhouse gets what it wants." I was out of options, and Grimwood knew it. The funhouse had already started to change me. I could feel it, the darkness gnawing at the edges of my mind, trying to pull me into its grasp. But I wasn't ready to give up. There had to be a way to break the curse, to end this once and for all. "You said the clowns need souls," I said slowly, an idea forming in my mind. "What if I found a way to break the pact? What if I destroyed whatever is keeping them bound?" Grimwood laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You think you can outsmart a curse that's been in place for decades? Be my guest, David. But you're running out of time." I didn't have long. Midnight was approaching, and if I didn't break the curse before then, would be trapped forever. I had to find the source of the funhouse's power, the object or ritual that kept the clowns bound to their twisted forms. I turned and sprinted back toward the funhouse, the carnival grounds, and now eerily silent. The rides were still, the tents flapping in the cold wind like the wings of some monstrous bird. I could feel the darkness closing in, the funhouse's malevolent presence growing stronger with every step. The red door loomed ahead of me, and with a deep breath, I pushed it open. The corridor beyond was darker than before, the air thick with the scent of decay. The mirrors along the walls reflected distorted versions of me, each one more monstrous than the last. The whispers were back, louder now, urging me to give in, to surrender to the funhouse's will. But I pushed forward, determined to find the source of the curse. Deep within the funhouse, I found it, an ancient, weathered box covered in strange symbols. It was hidden in a room filled with old, forgotten toys and carnival props. The air around the box was icy cold, and I could feel a dark energy pulsing from within it. This was it. The heart of the funhouse's curse. I grabbed the box and smashed it against the floor, the wood splintering under the force of the blow. Inside were dozens of small, shriveled figures, dolls twisted into grotesque shapes, each one with a face that looked eerily human. The clown's laughter echoed around me, but it was different now, angry, desperate. They knew what I was trying to do, and they were afraid. I grabbed a lighter from my pocket, flicking it on. "No more sacrifices," I whispered, setting the dolls on fire. The funhouse shuddered, the walls cracking, the mirrors splintering. The clowns screamed, their forms flickering like dying flames. The curse was breaking, and the funhouse was coming apart at the seams. I barely made it out as the funhouse collapsed behind me, the structure crumbling into dust. The clown's screams faded into silence, and for the first time, the air felt lighter. Grimwood was nowhere to be seen. The carnival grounds were empty, the ride still, the lights flickering one last time before going dark. I had done it. I had broken the curse. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the funhouse wasn't truly gone. The darkness I had unleashed would find a new home, a new way to feed. And somewhere, in the shadows, the clowns were waiting. The ruins of the funhouse still smoldered behind me, the air filled with the acrid scent of burning wood and something else, something darker, like the stench of rotting flesh. My hands were shaking, my mind racing with everything that had happened. I had broken the cursed dolls, shattered the heart of the funhouse's power, and brought the whole place down. But deep inside, a voice whispered that it wasn't over. Not yet. The carnival grounds were eerily silent. The rides were motionless, their once joyful music now a distant memory. I stumbled through the darkness, the cold wind biting through my clothes. The destruction of the funhouse should have ended everything, but instead, I felt a growing sense of dread, like a storm was gathering on the horizon. I had to find Grimwood. He was the key to all of this. If he was still alive, he would have the answers I needed. I had to know whether the curse was truly broken, or if I had merely unleashed something even worse. As I made my way through the darkened carnival, the shadows seemed to shift and pulse around me, whispering my name. My footsteps echoed in the stillness, the sound far too loud in the oppressive quiet. "David." I froze, my heart pounding. The voice was soft, almost childlike, but it sent chills racing down my spine. The clowns were supposed to be gone. I had destroyed their power source. But as I turned a corner, I saw them, figures moving in the darkness, their twisted grins glowing faintly in the dim light. The clowns weren't gone. They were still here. "No," I whispered, backing away. "I broke the curse. I destroyed the dolls." But the clowns continued to advance, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but no matter how fast I moved, they were always right behind me, their laughter echoing in the darkness. I burst through the trees at the edge of the carnival grounds and found myself standing before the old caravan where I had confronted Grimwood earlier. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered inside. My only hope was to force Grimwood to undo whatever final trick he had played. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking loudly, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and decay. Grimwood was sitting at his desk, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light as he watched me enter. "I knew you'd come back," he said, his voice a low, mocking whisper. "You thought you could destroy the funhouse? Fool. The carnival's curse is far older than you can imagine." "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded, stepping forward. "I destroyed the dolls. I broke the curse." Grimwood's laughter filled the room, a sound so cold it sent shivers down my spine. "The funhouse was never the source of the curse, David. It was merely a vessel. You destroyed its heart, but you failed to realize that the curse isn't tied to the building, it's tied to me." My heart sank as the truth hit me like a freight train. Grimwood wasn't just the carnival's owner. He was its puppet master, the anchor that kept the curse alive. The funhouse was just a symptom. He was the disease. "You can't stop it," Grimwood continued, rising from his chair. "You've already been marked, David. The funhouse chose you the moment you broke the rules. The clowns have claimed your soul." "No," I shouted, backing away. "I won't let you turn me into one of them." But Grimwood's grin only widened. "You misunderstand. The clowns don't want you to join them, David. They want you to replace me. The funhouse needs a new keeper, and you've already proven yourself worthy." The room seemed to tilt, the shadows growing darker as Grimwood's words sank in. This was his plan all along. The funhouse was never meant to claim me as one of its victims, it was grooming me to take his place. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "I won't do it. I'd rather die." Grimwood's eyes glowed with a dark amusement. "Then the funhouse will take you by force. It's your choice, David. Become the new caretaker, or let the clowns devour your soul." I was trapped. Either way, I would be bound to this cursed place forever. But then, an idea sparked in my mind, a way to turn Grimwood's own curse against him. I lunged forward, grabbing one of the old bottles from Grimwood's desk and smashing it against the floor. The dark liquid inside spilled out, filling the air with a foul stench. Grimwood recoiled, his eyes widening in shock. "What are you doing?" he snarled. "You said the curse is tied to you," I shouted, grabbing a lighter from my pocket. "If I can destroy the source." "No!" Grimwood screamed, lunging toward me, but it was too late. I flicked the lighter, tossing it into the spreading pool of liquid. Flames erupted, consuming the room in a rush of heat and light. The fire spread rapidly, the ancient wood of the caravan catching like kindling. Grimwood screamed as the flames licked at his flesh, his body writhing as the curse that had sustained him for so long turned against him. The air was filled with the screams of the clowns, their twisted faces appearing in the flickering shadows, their eyes wide with terror as their power source was consumed by the flames. "David, you fool!" Grimwood shrieked. "You'll destroy us all." "That's the plan," I hissed, backing toward the door. "I'd rather see this place burn than let it claim another soul." With one final, agonized scream, Grimwood collapsed, his body turning to ash as the curse was consumed by the fire. The clowns wailed in unison, their forms dissolving into shadows that were quickly devoured by the flames. I barely made it out of the caravan before it collapsed in on itself, the flames leaping into the sky like some hellish beacon. The entire carnival began to tremble, the ground beneath me shaking as if it were trying to pull me under. I ran as fast as I could, the heat of the fire licking at my back, the screams of the clowns growing fainter as the curse that had bound them for so long was finally broken. The rides collapsed, the tents caught fire, and the lights flickered out one by one. When I finally reached the edge of the forest, I turned back to see the entire carnival engulfed in flames, the smoke rising into the night sky like a funeral pyre. I had done it. I had destroyed the curse. But as I stood there, gasping for breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had escaped, something darker, something that would find another way to feed. A week later, the charred remains of Grimwood Carnival were still smoldering when I returned to the site. I needed to see it one last time, to convince myself that it was truly over. The carnival was nothing more than a blackened wasteland, the funhouse reduced to rubble. But as I stood there, I noticed something strange, a new sign, hastily nailed to a half-burned pole. It read, "Help wanted. Caretaker needed. Apply within." The ground beneath the sign shifted, and from the ashes, a familiar doll with a painted grin and a single black tear emerged, its eyes locking onto mine. The cycle was beginning again,